12 million people who live in the shadows, who don't have the same kinds of rights, who can be manipulated on the job, who aren't able to be part of labor unions, who are living often in mixed status families, so they have children who are US citizens and yet the parents are undocumented, which often means that they're not going for health care, they don't have access to education, access to health care, all the other benefits, and yet they've been here many times, they've been a part of the community for 10, 12 years. Asians there are about 3 million undocumented immigrants within the Asian community. Asians suffer some of the worst family backlogs that we have, Filipinos in particular, for example. Africans are prominent in the refugee asylee category, which are also affected by broken immigration laws. So there's a whole host of ways in which different communities are affected. There are very few ways for the majority of undocumented immigrants to actually become documented. So that is the first thing. It is not a choice to stay undocumented. There is no choice here. People sometimes think, it's interesting to me in surveys, that people think that people are choosing to be undocumented because they want to somehow rip off the system. That is absolutely false. For anybody who is living a life in the shadows, it is not a choice. Anybody would choose to be documented rather than undocumented and have the full rights that are available, but the system simply doesn't allow for it in the majority of cases. We need to find a way to legalize the 12 million that are here, give them the ability to stay here with legal status, and ultimately provide a path to citizenship. We understand that in this battle, those 12 million are going to have to go through some sort of a process. There are going to be requirements that would be put into place in order for somebody to legalize. This is not an amnesty program. This would be some sort of a legalization program where people would pay a fine. Ultimately, our goal is to keep as many of the 12 million in the country with full protections as possible and on the road to citizenship. Third prong of immigration reform is what's called future flow of workers. So this is the category of workers that are coming into the country for any kind of temporary jobs, as well as permanent jobs in the future. So you can have seasonal workers for agriculture, obviously. Students would be a part of future flow categories. H-1B visas that are here. If you're graduate students, I think is it H-1Bs as well. So it can be any category of future flow, but how many future flows of workers are we going to allow into the country? And what are the parameters under which they would be allowed? So some of the questions here revolve around, from the worker rights perspective, ensuring that future flows of workers have full protections as workers. In an ideal world, that would mean that if you came here on an agricultural visa, for example, that you would not be tied to your employer, that you would be able to take that visa and move to a different employer so that your employer can say to you, I'm sorry, ma'am, but I'm not going to pay you this week because I don't feel like it. And if you don't like it, I'm going to send you home because you have no other choice, right? I think that's very unlikely that we will get that, but those are the kinds of things we're fighting for. We want workers to have the right to join a union, as an example. So there are a number of pieces like that. So the future flow of workers is very controversial. Labor unions and African American communities in particular have been concerned about high unemployment rates of native-born workers in the country and then bringing workers in from outside. So there's a proposal on the table to have some sort of a commission that would regulate the future flow levels according to things like unemployment rates, for example. So if we had really high unemployment rates in the United States, then the future flow levels would go down. So they would actually be tied somehow to what's happening in our economy. If we have full employment here, great, bring in the workers. So there's some proposals on the table. They're very controversial to find a balance of where business is going to agree and where labor is going to agree. And then there's border security. There's definitely going to be border security as part of immigration reform. There's no question about that. The question is, can we protect due process rights? Can we ensure that people have access to judicial review? Can we roll back some of the terrible things that have been done over the last 10 years in terms of people actually having rights within the immigration system? And then depending on how you cut it, there are any number of other pieces that could be added in there. But I think those are the main components. To me, there are, three real areas that we are focused on in terms of thinking about comprehensive immigration reform. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about what we think of when we say comprehensive immigration reform. But the three areas are really the legislative challenges, because the law is so outdated. The federal immigration law is so old and outdated on so many levels that it simply doesn't reflect the needs of the economy today or the values of the country. Both things are true. So legislatively, the challenges of drafting a good immigration law that moves us forward on all the multiple levels is very complex. The second is the political challenges. Politically, the Republicans, extreme Republicans, not the center Republicans, but the extreme Republicans, have tried to use immigration as a wedge issue, even though it is a bipartisan issue of interest. And so politically, there are a number of Republicans, even though they exist in districts where their economies depend on immigrants, and we have some here in central Washington and eastern Washington, they will not vote for a comprehensive immigration reform bill, purely from a political perspective of what the extreme right of the Republican Party is trying to do. Third is the public will challenges. The interesting thing about the data is that we have not been able to get the 65% that support immigration reform to be vocal on immigration reform. And so one of our big challenges is to show that the public will really is at 65%, because right now, that's not what the politicians hear. And so every time we're advocating with the senators and with Congress around immigration reform and how much we need it, they say to me, Pramila, I haven't gotten my calls. Where are my calls? I get this many calls or this many letters from anti-immigrants, and I'm only getting this much from pro-immigrants. So there is a public will component, and I think part of it is that people are confused. It is a complex issue. It's difficult to talk about. It's an emotional issue. You can only use statistics to a certain extent, and then it's about the heart. It's about connecting with people's values, about what's right to do in this country, about what justice and democracy really are, and about what the United States' role is in upholding kind of this dream of a nation of immigrants and all that we stand for. Even though the debate on immigration reform always seems to center primarily on Latino immigrants, it is our challenge and our responsibility to make sure that we frame this debate so everybody understands it is about Caucasians, because Caucasians actually benefit from the labor and the diversity of immigrants in this country. It is about Asians, it's about Africans, it's about Russians, it's about Latinos, it's about a whole host of immigrant communities. Unfortunately, what happens is the debate gets focused only on one population, and sometimes that can be divisive.